As you may remember, last year in Italy, we released these latest figures on the size of the global wellness economy and its 10 sectors. And as Kathy just mentioned, over the past year, the focus of our big GWI research study has been on one of these sectors where we have not yet done original research at GWI, and that is the fitness and mind-body sector. So as we begin, I would like to ask all of you to just take a moment and think about what images come into your head when we say the words fitness and mind-body. So just take a moment and think about it. And I am going to guess that many of you get images like this. You know, these are kind of the typical images that we see in the media and in advertising. You might be thinking about people going to the gym or working with a personal trainer, or maybe taking a spin class or a Pilates or yoga class. You might also be thinking about some particular companies or brands in this sector, things like Equinox, Planet Fitness, Pure Yoga, SoulCycle, CrossFit, Pure Barre, F45, Peloton. I mean, that list goes on and on. Maybe some of you are thinking about your own companies. I would also guess that a lot of you do many of these activities yourselves. But now I want to ask you a question. Do we need to do any of these things in order to be well or to live a long and healthy life? So maybe raise your hands if you think yes. Okay. So I'm not trying to trick you, but the correct answer to this question is actually no. We do not have to do the things you see in the images here on the screen in order to be well. So maybe some of you saw this headline in the news last year, or some of you who were at last year's summit might remember the presentation that was made by the Blue Zones, which are places in the world where people have some of the longest and the healthiest lifespans. To stay healthy, one of the most important things that we need to do is to move our bodies and to be physically active throughout our lives. But there are many, many ways that we can be physically active without going to the gym or doing what we think of as fitness. Because we're active when we do all kinds of sports and recreational and outdoor activities. We're active when we walk or bike to work or do those things just for fun. We're also active when we do routine tasks around the things that we might do at our jobs or around our homes. And so when we set out last year to do this research study, we realized very early on in the process that fitness was actually the wrong topic for us to be studying. Because when we think about wellness, what we really need to be talking about is physical activity in all of its forms. And fitness is just one piece of that bigger picture. So now, with that, let's go back to our famous bubble chart. Because we have decided to throw out the fitness bubble entirely. So everyone can wave goodbye to fitness and mind-body. And now we're officially replacing fitness with a new bubble for physical activity. And so this morning, what we want to do is get everyone thinking more broadly about physical activity, what it is, how big it is, what it means from an economic perspective, and also how we can get more people all around the world doing more of it.
So what is physical activity? And this is the definition from the World Health Organization. A lot of words on the screen. I'm not going to read it, but just scan these words, and you may notice what is missing in this definition. We don't see the word exercise in there. So, to be physically active and to get the health benefits, we do not need to go to the gym or formally exercise. And for most of human history, we had to move a lot just to survive. We were hunters and gatherers, and we had to run away from predators. Even just 100 years ago, we were fishermen and farmers. We had to go find fuel. We had to fetch water from the well or rivers. We had to wash our own clothes. And women were mostly carrying babies on their backs while they were doing all of those things. And so in those days when people did physical activities for fun, recreationally, it is mostly a game for enjoyment in their leisure time. And it's certainly not for them to get more exercise. So fast forward to now, what happened is all of those unwanted physical labor, we have unloaded on all the machines or our household appliances and motorized transportation. So it's all very nice. And not only that, now with the internet and our smartphone, smart devices, we never have to leave our house to get food, to get anything, or to keep in touch with people, or to get news or entertainment. And so in less than 100 years, we went from harvesting potatoes to becoming the potatoes. So now we no longer have enough natural physical activity in our lives, and we're becoming sedentary and less healthy because of that. And so now we have to schedule time for physical activities for ourselves and for our children. Not only do we have to find time, schedule time to do that, we have to increasingly spend money to do that. And spending money creates industry and an economy. So that's what we're measuring and presenting today. The economy of recreational physical activity that now we have to do in our leisure time to make up for all the physical activity we don't get in our daily lives. So let's get right into measuring what this is, and I will use what Catherine and I do in our personal lives as examples. So the first slice of recreational physical activity is sports and active recreation. And so Catherine likes to go biking, hiking, and walking with her family. Catherine has also done ballet and all kinds of dance in her whole life. And for me, I like to go running occasionally, but for 10 years, I practiced Kung Fu with my twins in a Chinese martial arts studio, and that's my sport. All those are included in this sector of recreational physical activity. And this is really important, this sector, because this is where most children and youth get their activities, and people don't have to spend much money doing it. You can run outside, play team sports in the field, or ride your bicycles. So we estimate that this segment is worth $230 billion globally. So the next big slice we're very familiar with, fitness. And fitness includes all kinds of gym workouts and classes that most of you probably very familiar with and participate in. Catherine and I actually don't like gyms. We don't go to the gym. She has a treadmill and a stationary bike at home in her basement that she almost never used. I recently discovered Zumba, so I love going to the Zumba studio. And we count all those activities as part of fitness. So this fitness segment is, we estimate it to be $109 billion globally. And we estimate that around the world, about 190 million people pay for these things. They have gym memberships, or they pay for personal trainers and classes. But it is important to note that another 58 million people do fitness, what we consider as fitness, without paying much money. They may be working out at home, just lifting their own weights, or they could be using facilities in schools or universities. They take free classes, or they may be using community centers or free outdoor gyms. We actually, in our research, found that there are more than 21,000 public outdoor gyms around the world. So let's go to the third segment, and this is what we call mindful movement. So I do Tai Chi and yoga with my husband, and Catherine loves going to bar class. And both of us have been doing Pilates for almost 20 years. So all that pretty much summarize the main activities in mindful movement. And mindful movement is the smallest segment here. It's worth about $29 billion. And within this segment, their spending can vary widely. Some people spend $35 on a single class, but there are also millions of people who just practice Tai Chi in the park in the morning, or they may do community yoga, or just practice any of these things at home using videos or books or apps. So when we put all of them together, the recreational physical activity, all of it around the world, is worth $368 billion. And this is the direct spending of consumers to participate in these activities. So we're talking a lot of it's gym membership, paying for classes or trainers, or it could be you could be paying for racquetball, court fees or sports clubs fees.
So in addition to that, we also spend a lot of money on other things that help us to participate in these activities. And this is what we call the enabling sectors. So first, technology, which of course is playing a bigger and bigger role in all of our lives and has really been transforming this sector. So here, when we talk about technology, this includes all kinds of fitness wearables and trackers, high-tech equipment, and apps and streaming services that are giving consumers new ways to participate in all kinds of physical activities. And this segment also includes the business side of tech. So all kinds of enterprise technologies, digital platforms, and integrators that are being used to run businesses and serve customers better. So technology, you can see here, adds up to $26 billion globally. There's a huge market for equipment and supplies, things that we use both in gyms and also in our homes. This segment we measure at $109 billion, and this is very broad. It includes everything from the highest tech treadmills and rowing machines to very simple things like basketballs or tennis rackets. We spend a lot of money on things to wear. So that's everything from running shoes and athletic clothes to yoga pants, swimming suits, and on and on. And of course, our active lifestyles have inspired a whole new category of clothing, which we all know is athleisure. And of course, now many of us are wearing our athletic clothes all day long, everywhere we go. So as researchers, it was not even really possible for us to separate out which of the clothes and shoes are actually being worn to do physical activity and which are just being worn in our daily lives. And so that makes this a massive sector worth $333 billion around the world. So when we add up all of these enabling sectors, that's $466 billion. And interestingly, you'll notice that that amount is actually larger than the money you see at the top that we're spending on actually participating in activities. So altogether, the physical activity economy we measure as an $828 billion market around the world. So now let's go back to the famous bubble chart. Because now that we have a new sector and new figures, we also have to update this chart. The global wellness economy now becomes a $4.5 trillion market worldwide. And as you can see, physical activity is now the second largest sector in the wellness economy after personal care and beauty. Now some projections. As we look into the next 5 years, we project that the physical activity market will grow by 6.6% annually, which means that it will reach $1.1 trillion by 2023. And you can see here that growth rates for all of the physical activity segments are projected to grow faster than the GDP growth that's projected by the IMF. We expect that about 40% of the growth in the physical activity market will be in the Asia-Pacific region, and especially in China and India. Right now, North America is the world's largest market for physical activity spending, but in 5 years, it will be surpassed by Asia, taking the #1 spot. So let's think about this number, $828 billion, which of course is huge. But does that mean that there are actually a lot of active people in the world? Or does it mean that there is a small size of the population that is active, but they're just spending a lot of money doing those things? So now we want to take a quick look at the people who are behind these big dollar signs. So you can see on this map, this shows the percent of the population in each region around the world that is participating in recreational physical activities on a regular basis. And as you can see, the participation rates vary widely around the world. So there are some countries, places like Australia, Taiwan, Norway, New Zealand, that have really high participation rates, higher than 80% of their population. But at the other end of the spectrum, there are a lot of countries that are very low. For example, in India, the participation rate is only 15%. You can see the average globally is 35% of the population. And then if you look down in the corner there at the participation rates for specific segments, you can see that the highest is for active recreation and sports. And that's because, as Ophelia mentioned earlier, these kinds of activities are the things that are most accessible and affordable for most people, no matter where they live or what facilities they have access to. So from these numbers, you can see by our estimates, about 65% of the world's population is not regularly participating in recreational physical activity. And so now I want to compare that with another number. According to recent data that was compiled by The Lancet, about 30% of adults around the world are physically inactive. And that means that they are not meeting the WHO's recommendations for getting enough physical activity each week. So our number and The Lancet's number, which we've put side by side here, are not really measuring the same thing, of course, but it is interesting to compare them. Because if we think, okay, 65% of people not doing recreational activities, 30% of people not physically active at all, so what happens to the gap in between? That 35% who are not doing recreational activities, but they are physically active. So the answer to that question is found in another important piece of the physical activity picture. So far we've been talking about the top half of this graphic, the recreational part. But very importantly, physical activity also comes from what we call natural movement. And natural movement is something that is spontaneous, and it just happens in the course of our daily lives. So that can be things like running or cycling or walking to work or to the store. Things like our chores around our house, gardening, cleaning the house, washing the car, walking the dog. Or it can be from doing a job that requires physical labor or being on our feet all day. In the blue zones, which I mentioned earlier, the places where people live the longest, healthiest lives, people there do not exercise deliberately. They get enough physical activities from natural movement because they live in environments that encourage them to move all day long. But unfortunately, as Ophelia mentioned, more and more people do not live in these kinds of environments. Too many of us are trapped in modern sedentary lifestyles that are full of gadgets and conveniences that are discouraging us from moving. And so now most of us have to make up for our lack of natural movement by purposely scheduling exercise and physical activity in our free times.
And that is not easy. In our research, we collected dozens of studies around the world that asked people why they do or do not participate in recreational physical activities. And these are the main reasons that we found. Not surprisingly, both adults and children said lack of time. So raise your hand if you sometimes don't have time, or most of the time don't have time to exercise. So it should be all of us. If you don't raise your hand, you're probably lying or you're retired. You don't have enough to do in your lives. But both youth and adults also mentioned lack of interest and not having fun as a major reason. One of the surprises for us, though, is a lot of adults said their physical and their health conditions prevent them from participating. Another surprise is that we do not see cost or lack of money mentioned as a major barrier in most of these studies. What is mentioned is there is a lack of motivation or habit, or children prefer to do something else, they're not interested. Or for children and youth, the lack of convenient facilities near their home and schools, it's a major barrier. So clearly, to get more people moving, we have to figure out how to address these barriers. And of course, the business world is usually the quickest to see some market gaps, and then find some opportunities, and then to target these audience. So for example, technology. Now we have all kinds of apps and streaming and on-demand programming to help people to exercise anytime, anywhere, in any format, any level, or any length. And these business models are certainly making exercise more affordable and also more accessible, especially in the new formats to people who might live in areas where the infrastructure for physical activity is not as well developed. And many of you, like Catherine, may have an exercise bike or some other equipment at home that you stop using after 2 months because it is boring and you're not motivated. So there are now companies like Peloton or Mira that are trying to turn the whole in-home gym market on its head by connecting equipment to subscription of on-demand and live classes. So by sort of merging different kinds of technology and also using high-resolution display and use cameras and sensors and leaderboards and all kinds of things, these companies and these services can create that sense of community and motivation that comes with exercising with your tribe. Technology can also turn exercise into games that are fun and social. In fact, extra gaming has been around for decades. Fitness games, you probably all remember Wii Fit, and we have Pokemon Go that the children are so crazy about. There's Zombies Run, Dance Dance Revolution, and all of these things are quite popular, especially with young people, because they are affordable, and they're fun, and they're social. And now when you add other technologies into the mix, such as AR, VR, and GPS, there are even more possibilities.
So there is a huge segment of the world's population that is not being served by the existing exercise and fitness industry. And that's because most of these businesses and facilities are concentrated in places with the highest incomes, and they often are targeting the people who are already fit and already exercising. So this underserved market includes seniors and people with certain health conditions or physical conditions, and also women and girls in many places. With the aging demographics all around the world, the potential for the silver fitness market is enormous. But in order to serve this population, the industry is going to have to pivot from its focus on the young and the fit. It will need to create spaces and programs that are welcoming and inclusive for older generations and with properly trained professionals to support them. People with injuries, chronic health conditions, and disabilities need to exercise as much or more than healthy people. In the United States, there are now more than 1,400 medical fitness centers, which are often set up as partnerships with hospital systems. And these are providing a continuum of care in exercise, so moving people from rehab and physical therapy to physician-supervised exercise to prevention and general fitness. Here in Singapore, Active Health Labs was launched to provide health assessments and exercise programs that will help treat, manage, and prevent chronic conditions. And the UK has long been a leader in prescribing exercise for patients with health conditions. And there, people's exercise referrals can be integrated with publicly funded fitness facilities. In some places, women and girls are the underserved market, and this is especially where traditions and social norms are discouraging girls from doing sports or even prevent females from exercising in public or in co-ed situations. Fortunately, some of these laws and norms are easing up. So for example, in Saudi Arabia, they've recently changed their laws to allow for all female gyms. And companies have quickly rushed to open many women's-only fitness clubs in response. There is a new market for Arabic language fitness apps that are targeting women's fitness in the Middle East with culturally sensitive programming. And even in North America, where traditions are not as strict, female boxing gyms are emerging to create spaces where women can feel safe, comfortable, and empowered when they exercise.
So far we've talked about the business side, but not everybody has money to spend. And so this is where governments and public investments can play a very big role. Just providing the infrastructure for people to move and exercise can be very effective. And we're talking about very basic things, not fancy things. Bike lanes, walking trails, public swimming pools, recreation centers, racket courts, or maybe outdoor gyms, subsidized classes. Children, seniors, and low-income people are particularly dependent on these kinds of infrastructure. And there are only a handful of countries in the world that have made large-scale public infrastructure investments. And in the region, Singapore is one of them, Australia, Japan, United States, UK, Spain, and the Scandinavian countries are some examples. But even countries that are not as wealthy to make large infrastructure investment can still do a lot. Some governments sponsor large-scale, free public classes outdoors in public space like public squares and public parks. These types of programs are particularly popular in Latin America, including countries like Brazil, Mexico, Ecuador, Colombia, Bolivia, and so on. And many of these public exercise programs were created specifically to target the rising incidence of chronic disease and rising obesity and physical inactivity in the region. In addition, governments and real estate developers have a very big role to play to plan communities and neighborhoods that actually are walkable and made it pleasant and make it inviting and convenient for people to walk or take their bicycles or take public transportation to anywhere they needed to go. So in general, better urban planning and better transportation planning are both very important to help people reintroduce the natural movement and spontaneous physical activities into their daily lives.
To build a lifelong habit of staying active, we have to start when we're young, of course. And for children, sports is usually the most accessible form of physical activity. But unfortunately, in many wealthy countries, playing sports no longer means just a fun, spontaneous pickup game in the park. Instead, sports have become highly structured and expensive activities that involve coaching, competition, achievements, and often injuries. And sports have become pretty stressful for both children and their parents. And so the result is that a lot of children who are not serious or elite players tend to drop out of sports by the time they're 13 or 14 years old, and that's especially true for girls. So it's critical to put the play back into sports for kids, to encourage children to enjoy movement and sports simply because they're fun and not to win or achieve anything. In schools, we have the emphasis so much on academics, grades, and exams that's sidelining physical education classes. In some countries, recess is getting shorter or even eliminated so that students can spend more time sitting in class and studying and sitting in desks. And of course, this unhealthy development also needs to stop. Government education policies and public funding has a huge role in bringing outdoor play and physical education back into school for all children.
So we started this presentation talking about the wellness economy, the spending in physical activities, and how quickly that market is going to grow in the next 5 years. The irony in these projections, like Catherine mentioned before, is that more spending on recreational physical activities does not automatically mean that there is a higher percentage of people who are doing these activities. In fact, we know that the global trend has been a steady rise of physical inactivity along with rising incomes and urbanization. And this growing sedentary population is really alarming, especially when you pair that with the rising incidence of chronic disease. So when you think about it, it would be kind of a shame in this very big market that we're just kind of creating an opportunity for people to spend money that it is just a privilege to exercise, to move. And that spending $828 billion and maybe soon $1 trillion, we're actually not making a dent in a global epidemic of physical inactivity. So we would like to maybe think about a world in the future, or hopefully soon, that we treat the opportunity to be physically active as really a basic right for everyone, wherever they live, whatever their economic means, their age, and the physical or health conditions. So it is really time for us, whatever sector we're in, public, private, nonprofits, to kind of think more systematically and think more inclusively and not just maybe target the easy market of people we want to serve. Because if we really want to make a dent and contribute to the world of wellness, we really need to figure out how to get more people to move. And as I look around the room, all of you who are at this conference, and you're in wellness and you're in your wellness business, I'm hopeful. I feel that you are probably the right group of people who can help make this happen. Thank you.